Hey, new law students, if you're wondering of the best way to write your case summaries, then stick around because I'll be sharing in this video 3 different approaches to writing your case summaries. And I think you'll actually need to be using all 3 approaches during your legal studies. So let's go. Let's take a quick look at what those 3 approaches are to writing case summaries, and then we'll jump in and have a look at some examples. So approach number 1 is going to be your shortest case summary and is often only 1 or 2 lines. And basically that short summary is really just going to have the name of the case. You might only just mention one party of the case name for which it's mainly known for. And in that case summary, you will just outline what that legal principle, that case is the authority for. So nice and short and simple. Then in approach 2 is where we start to have a more detailed case summary. And here you can see I've got some of the areas that you would normally need to cover. So normally in approach 2, you would have the full case citation details there. You would outline the key material facts. You just want the relevant facts. And then number 3, you will then outline what the legal issue is or legal issues. There may be more than one legal issue for that case. And then number 4, then what is it that the court decided? What was the holding? What was the decision? Depending on which part of the world you live in the US, they often call this the holding. Here in Australia, we might use the language of held or decision. But essentially what we're looking at is what was the court's decision and what was their legal reasoning for their decision. And in there, you'll also find what we know as the legal rules or the ratio. And then, of course, was there any overarching impact as a result from this case? So in approach 2, you can see you've got quite a bit more information there when compared to approach 1. And finally, we have approach 3, which is your longest case summaries, or some may call a case brief. And in there, you may have some additional information to what you had in approach 1 and 2. For example, you may include information around any previous litigation history. So maybe the case that you're looking at has been escalated up to a higher court. And so you may need to include various details as to how, where, and why a particular case has been escalated up through the court hierarchy. You may also need to include details around the majority judgments and also details around any dissenting or minority judgments. And of course, in approach 3, maybe the case that you're looking at has had an impact on how the law has evolved over time. So you will need to call that out if that is a pertinent piece of information around that case. Let's now jump in and have a look at a simple example for approach 1, where we are creating very short case summaries. Normally, you will need to do this in preparation for your exams. So the example that I've got here is just one of the pages of my notes that I prepared for my contract law exam. And this was to do with remedies, and this particular scenario or topic is to do with unliquidated damages. And normally what I'd have is up the top, what type of legal issue is it that we are looking at, or that would highly likely come up in the exam. And so for this particular example, the type of legal issue is, or the scenario that we might be provided is that there's 2 parties, and if there's been a breach of contract and the plaintiff is asking whether they are entitled to any damages. And so in terms of really what I just wanted to share with you was down here in the bottom right-hand side of this table, you can see where I've got the name of the key cases. And here we've got the legal principle or the legal rule that that case is known for. So what we can see here is we look at the whole table here on the left-hand side. These are the steps that I would need to go through in answering a legal problem or question in an exam to be able to answer and address that legal issue, whether the plaintiff in my scenario is entitled to any damages. And so first, if there's been a breach, then yes, you carry on. Step 2, so has the plaintiff proved her loss or damage that can be recoverable by law? And you can see in the middle here, I've got a nice short summary of what the element is that we have to address in answering this particular question. We've got the causation element, remoteness, and there's also a mitigation element as well. And then over here, you can see I've got the cases or the case law that I need to be able to refer to when discussing each of these elements and each of these steps in my scenario. And moving on to an example for approach number 2, and this is where we can start adding some further details to our case summary. So I would recommend that you use a template similar to what I've got on the slide here for when you're developing your weekly study notes or your weekly tutorial that's coming up, and you've got a particular case or two that will be covered or discussed in the tutorial. Or maybe you're working on an assignment, and in that situation, you would then most likely go on and build out and use approach number 3. And finally, let's have a quick look at an example for approach number 3, which is where we have the more detailed case summaries. So when would I suggest you need to do this? Well, first of all, if you are advised by your lecturer or your learning curriculum that a particular case is a core foundational case of authority for your subject, then I would definitely do more detailed case summaries and analysis. Other times that you will need to develop more detailed case summaries is, let's say you're preparing for a moot assessment exercise, and in those situations you would definitely be developing some quite in-depth case summaries. Or let's say you have to write a research paper or a detailed legal memo, you may need to have quite in-depth case summaries developed. So there you go, 3 approaches to writing a case summary. Hopefully you can see that they all serve a different purpose. I'll see you next time.